He steps out of a fire explosion without a scratch, locks eyes on the guy who caused it, and caves his entire ribcage in with one hit. 300 players coordinate a perfect ambush, and he still makes them bleed for every single second of it. He finds out the game he's been playing for years is actually real. Every monster is a living creature. Every city is a real place. Every person he's ever killed was breathing. And you know what his reaction is? He accepts the Vanguard contract and grins. One man. No guild, no backup. Holding a fortress wall against 500 enemies until the ground underneath him is buried in bodies. That's where we're going. But first, let's rewind to the moment everything got ripped away. Here's the thing they never put in the tutorial. The VR capsules people use to enter the Lord, they're not running a simulation. They're opening actual dimensional gates to a parallel universe. Every server is a real location. Every NPC is a real person. The monsters are real. The cities are real. And for years, the world's best solo player has been carving through it all thinking he's just grinding pixels. His name is Rokan. Players call him the King of Violence. And before we get into how he claws his way back from absolute zero, you need to understand what they took from him. Rokan isn't some tryhard who got lucky. He's the kind of player who spent years dissecting this game down to its skeleton, learning the hidden mechanics, the secret achievement chains, the stat breakpoints that normal players never even find. While everyone else was grinding mobs in a line, Rokan was engineering, and it paid off. He became the number 2 ranked player in the entire world, a solo SS ranker, the kind of fighter who could walk into a 20-man dungeon and walk out with better clear times than the parties that trained for it specifically. That made him a target. The number 1 ranked player, Odin, King of Creation, leader of the Ragnarok Guild, can't beat Rokan in a straight fight. Neither can any player alive. So Odin does what powerful cowards always do. He builds a coalition, 300 players, every major guild, every heavy hitter, all of them coordinated in a single, absolute ambush. They don't fight him, they don't challenge him, they dump every overpowered skill and high-end item they collectively own into one simultaneous detonation, and they do it again, and again, and again, 8 times. They kill him 8 consecutive times, stripping levels, draining experience, dismantling years of work 1 death at a time until his name vanishes off the global leaderboard entirely. And then Odin walks up to the man sitting at 2% health, humiliated, stripped, deleted from rankings, and offers him a spot in the guild. Pity. Pity from the guy who organized the hit. Rokan tells him exactly what he can do with that offer. Then his character gets deleted. He wakes up in 2021. Not respawning, not loading into a checkpoint. He's back in the real world, 3 years before the Lord even launches, lying in his actual apartment with his actual rent due and 0 gold coins to his name. For a few seconds, he genuinely thinks he's lost his mind. Then the calendar confirms it. 3 years. He's been sent back 3 full years, right to the moment before the game existed. Most people would spiral. Rokan gets up, laces his boots, and walks to the gym. If he's going back in, and he absolutely is, he's going back better. His future knowledge is his real weapon. He knows every hidden achievement, every secret dungeon entrance, every auction update before it happens. He knows the exact day the game launches. He knows which early game bosses drop the titles that quietly break the stat system wide open. While every other player starts the Lord treating it like a fun new RPG, Rokan is going to treat it like a war he already has the battle plan for. He conditions for months. Real gym, real weight, real stamina. Because whatever he builds in the game, his physical condition in the real world determines how sharp his reflexes in the capsule actually are. He is not playing this twice. He is going to do it once, perfectly, and the people who took everything from him won't see him coming until it's already over. The game launches. The second Rokan drops into the tutorial zone, he skips the opening cutscene, ignores the quest marker, and walks straight up to the nearest goblin. Level 2 creature, a literal tutorial mob. Every new player takes a few swings, gets used to the combat feel, maybe dies once, reads the tooltips. Rokan one-punches it. Not with a weapon, with his fist. Because he already knows exactly how much base damage a first-tier physical strike deals, and exactly how much health a level 2 goblin has, and he's already done the math on whether this is more efficient than picking up the starter sword. It is. He tears through the entire tutorial village. Not farming, clearing. When the tutorial culminates in a nighttime goblin raid, the opening event designed to teach new players about group combat and defensive tactics. Rokan is already awake, positioned, and he dismantles the entire raid before most players even realize it started. Solo. 0 deaths. Full village cleared. That earns him his first hidden achievement, a permanent survival title stacked directly onto his baseline stats, invisible to every other player, untraceable. While the leaderboards show a level 1 character with starter gear, Rokan's actual attribute values are already pulling ahead of where they should be. He's not even warmed up. The next target is a level 15 goblin boss living in the ruins at the edge of the tutorial zone. Most players at this point are level 6 or 7 at best. The boss is designed for small groups of 10. It has heavy armor, a regeneration cycle, and a damage output that chunks through standard HP bars in 2 hits. Rokan doesn't kill it in a fair fight. He finds the structural weak point in the ruined building the boss patrols through. An old ceiling beam, rotten and stress-fractured, load-bearing for the entire left wall of the structure. He waits for the boss to walk under it. Then he hits the support. The entire wall caves in. Boss is pinned under several tons of collapsed architecture. Rokan walks over, finishes it while it's still processing the physics, and collects the drop. Another title. Another permanent hidden stat bonus layered silently onto his baseline. His visible level is still 1. His actual combat ability is already something entirely different. He reaches Pocket City, the first major hub, and immediately identifies the training dummy range at the edge of the market district. Every player passes it. Most hit it a few times to test their skills and move on. The dummies respawn health, they don't give experience, and grinding them doesn't level you up. There's no obvious reason to spend extended time there. Rokan spends days there, not because dummies give experience. They don't. He's grinding something the game tracks separately, raw physical stat growth from repetitive high-intensity training. It's a mechanic nobody talks about, because nobody has time for it. Why hit a dummy for 6 hours when you could run a dungeon? Because those dungeon levels cap out at certain stat ceilings, and the dummy grinding doesn't. He's not trying to level faster. He's trying to build a foundation that makes every level he earns later worth triple what it would normally be. By the time he leaves the dummy range, his baseline strength, endurance, and reflex stats are sitting at values that wouldn't be out of place on a player 40 levels above him. And while he was in there, he found it. The hidden entrance to the underground challenge vault. A secret room beneath the training grounds that nobody activates because nobody grinds long enough to trigger the detection threshold. He clears it alone, collects the title, moves on. Kato is the second city, and it's where Rokan makes his most expensive decision. He transitions to the Berserker class. Here's what that means. Changing specialized classes in the Lord resets your visible character level back to 1. That's the scary part. The number drops to 0, the leaderboard clears your name, and to everyone watching it looks like you rolled a brand new character. What it doesn't reset is your accumulated raw stats. All that dummy grinding, all those hidden achievements, all those title buffs, every single attribute point stays locked in. The visible level is just a number. The actual combat values remain. The Berserker path also limits how many separate skills Rokan can learn. He's locked into a narrower kit. But what it does to the skills he does have is absolutely unhinged. Each individual ability gets multiplied in mastery depth, combo branching, and raw output to a degree that standard multi-class builds can't touch. Rokan isn't building breadth. He's building one extremely specific weapon and sharpening it until it cuts through anything. He's also, immediately, broke. The skill books for Berserker abilities cost a small fortune, and Rokan goes into debt buying them. Real financial pressure, rent in the real world, debt in the game, 0 visible progression on the leaderboard. If someone were watching him from the outside, it would look like disaster. Then a level 25 elite knight in Kato's central dueling plaza decides to make it publicly worse. The knight is ranked in the city's top 50. He's wearing a high-grade full-plate set that cost him months of dungeon grinding to assemble. He rides into the plaza looking for a casual warm-up duel and spots a visible level 1 character standing near the challenge post. He issues the duel publicly, offers 15 silver, a sum that would genuinely help Rokan's financial situation, as a bet, fully expecting this to be a 40-second cleanup. Rokan accepts. The knight opens with a cavalry standard sweep combo, the kind of sequence that generates enough force to physically knock a lighter character off balance before the first counterattack window even opens. It's designed to end duels early through momentum control. Rokan steps around it. Not backward, sideways, inside the arc, where the sweep generates zero force. He reads the exact timing of every incoming strike and simply isn't where the blade goes. The knight adjusts, pushes harder, starts chaining faster combinations. Rokan ducks one, sidesteps the next, shifts his weight to ghost a third, and then throws a single punch. One punch. No weapon, no skill activation, pure physical stat output. The knight's helmet crumples. His chest plate shatters at the joint seams. He drops. The plaza goes silent. Rokan collects his 15 silver, pays off part of his debt, and walks away from a crowd of players who are currently loading his profile and seeing a level 1 Berserker with 0 listed achievements. The dungeon beneath the orc camp is locked behind a level gate. Standard zone restriction. You can't enter the central orc territory without hitting a minimum level threshold, and Rokan doesn't meet it. Not visibly anyway. He finds a high-tier balancing party, the kind of organized group that escorts lower-level players through restricted zones for a fee. The kind of group that charges up front, positions the paying client in the middle of the formation, and generally treats them as expensive cargo to be kept alive long enough to reach the destination. Rokan pays the fee, gets positioned in the center of the formation, and then, the moment they cross the zone boundary and the balancing group relaxes into their standard escort rhythm, he peels off the column, walks directly into the densest concentration of orc enemies, and starts working. The balancing group watches their paid passenger, their level 1 cargo, begin systematically dismantling orc elites at a pace that makes their own formation look amateur. By the time they process what they're witnessing, Rokan has already reached the interior stronghold. Inside, he triggers the Warrior's Honor questline, a hidden quest chain that only activates when a character enters a specific NPC dialogue tree without any active combat buffs, signaling genuine solo intent. The quest locks out party assistance. It sets the encounter at a fixed difficulty, calibrated to the questline's intended level range, not the character's actual stats. And it drops the Orc Chief as the final fight. The Chief hits like a siege weapon. He has a charge attack that stagger breaks shields, a ground slam that deals AoE trauma damage, and a health total scaled for a 6-man party at appropriate level. Rokan has no shield, he has no party. He triggers Unbreakable Resolve, one of his hidden achievement titles, a passive that converts incoming damage above a certain threshold into a flat wound resistance for a limited window, and walks through the Chief's charge. Not around it, through it. He takes the hit, absorbs it, and delivers the counter that ends the fight. Full questline completed, solo, level 1 visible, actual stats somewhere in the upper 30s in equivalent combat power. The Orc faction NPCs register him as a proven warrior, and he walks out with deep faction trust that'll open questlines most players won't find for months. The sewers beneath Kato are where the tone of the story shifts for the first time. The city has a disease problem, NPCs are getting sick, the local merchant district has a quarantine block, and there's a public questline that asks players to investigate. The intended solution is a long chain. Interview sick NPCs, track the contamination source through 3 separate districts, collect sample evidence, bring it to the city healer, get directed toward the sewer system, and eventually find the cause after about 6 hours of active play. Rokan already knows what's down there. He skips the questline entirely, drops into the sewer access hatch on the east side of the market district, and starts moving through the tunnel system. The sewers are loaded with mutant creatures, oversized rats with bone mutations, bloated amphibians with toxic skin secretions, spider variants adapted to the chemical runoff. 200 creatures across a network of tunnels that the questline only intended players to reach after significant level progress. Rokan clears all 200. The final boss is a giant rat, not in the cute way. In the way where it's roughly the size of a draft horse, it's covered in tumors that periodically burst into toxic clouds, and it has a biting attack that inflicts a stacking plague debuff that deals heavy damage over time while lowering all resistances. Standard players deal with this by rotating healer buffs and DPS bursting the tumor nodes before they pop. Rokan kills it before it can trigger the first tumor cycle. He recovers the cursed plague jewel from its corpse, the actual source of the contamination, a magical artifact that had been leaching pestilence into the water supply. The city quest auto-completes. The quarantine lifts. Players who spent 6 hours following the NPC dialogue chain get a completion notification and feel good about themselves. Rokan gets the jewel, a bonus rare title for solo clearing a group dungeon event, and 0 credit in the public quest feed. Because he finished it so fast the system didn't register him as participating in the official investigation chain. He considers this a feature, not a bug. The Mage Tower in Kato's upper district is where Rokan meets Sir Storin. Sir Storin is, on paper, an eccentric NPC wizard who runs an optional side quest line about theoretical magical research. In reality, he's a top-tier illusion specialist who spends his days constructing increasingly elaborate perceptual traps for players who wander into his tower, watching them embarrass themselves, and occasionally offering advanced tutelage to the ones who figure it out. The tower's entrance questline is famous for humiliating confident players. The lobby looks normal, but everything in it is a layered illusion. The staircase goes down while appearing to go up, the bookshelves contain fake titles that read as real at a glance, and the ambient lighting is calibrated to make people instinctively trust false distance measurements. Most players figure it out eventually. Some never do and abandon the quest chain thinking it's bugged. Rokan walks in, immediately identifies that the light source is artificial and directionally inconsistent with the windows, notes that his own shadow is oriented wrong relative to the apparent sun position, and stops. He pulls out the lie detector item, a minor magical trinket he picked up from the Plague Jewel dungeon, the kind of accessory most players sell for quick coin because it has no offensive stats. It reads environmental constructs, not just spoken words. He holds it up. The entire lobby flickers. Storin appears from behind a bookshelf that wasn't there a moment ago, looks at the lie detector, looks at Rokan, and makes a sound that is approximately the wizard equivalent of a surprised laugh. He's been setting this trap for months. Rokan is the third player to ever identify the light inconsistency, and the first one to have an item that could strip the full illusion layer in under a minute. That earns his trust. And accidentally, it also short-circuits the global public questline connected to the tower, a city-wide mystery event that dozens of players had been working on cooperatively for days. The key to the public questline was inside the illusion layer Rokan just dissolved in 40 seconds. The public quest feed immediately starts receiving completion events. Players who were 3 steps away from the finale get full credit for something they didn't finish. Players who were on step 1 get it anyway. The entire server is briefly confused about why the city mystery just auto-resolved. Rokan is already inside the tower asking Storin about the hidden tomb dungeon. The wooden leg belongs to a dwarven merchant NPC named Brick, who runs a pottery stall near Kato's east gate. Nobody talks to Brick. His inventory is mid-tier ceramics, his dialogue tree is short, and his daily routine is a loop of 3 locations that leads nowhere interesting. Players walk past him constantly. He's been categorized in community wikis as a flavor NPC, atmosphere, background detail, no mechanical relevance. The wooden leg is the key to a hidden tomb dungeon buried 40 meters beneath the city. Rokan knows this because in his original timeline, the tomb got discovered by a solo explorer 8 months after launch. Too late to matter. By which point the dungeon's skeleton waves had been out-leveled into irrelevance by the player base. The guy who found it posted the method on a minor forum. The post got 12 upvotes and was mostly dismissed as a weird flex. Rokan read it, recognized the implications immediately, and filed it away. He walks up to Brick, buys the cheapest ceramic bowl in his inventory to open the extended dialogue tree, and works through the conversation branches until he reaches the one where Brick mentions the leg. Offhand, like it's a throwaway line about a bad memory. Rokan responds with the specific empathy dialogue option that triggers Brick's trust threshold. Brick hands over the leg, just gives it to him, seems relieved. Rokan takes it to the northeast corner of the market district, finds the specific flagstone that the leg's base pin fits into, and presses it down. The floor opens. The tomb is a skeleton dungeon, long corridors of ancient burial chambers, with skeleton soldiers spawning in waves off stone sarcophagi that line every wall. The design intent is for the dungeon to be run at around level 30 to 35, with a party handling crowd control while a damage dealer works through wave resets. Rokan enters at level 1 visible, actual stats hovering around low to mid-30s equivalent, and no crowd control. He also has no party. What he has is knowledge of the dungeon's spawn timing. Skeleton waves in this dungeon activate sequentially. The next chamber's skeletons don't spawn until movement is detected past the threshold midpoint of the current chamber. Standard players running in formation trigger all the waves simultaneously because the group spreads across the midpoint threshold faster than the spawn timer can process. They get surrounded. Rokan moves through each chamber alone, hitting the midpoint threshold carefully, dealing with one wave at a time, and moving forward before the next set activates. He runs the entire dungeon solo on a skeleton-by-skeleton basis, which takes longer than a party clear, but results in exactly 0 situations where he's outnumbered. By the 4th chamber, he's already leveling. By the 9th, he's hit level 30. The tomb boss is a skeleton general, ancient full-plate armor, twin curved blades, and a horse-mounted combat stance that doubles its movement radius and attack arc. The fight is designed around the horse. Kill the mount first to lock the general into ground-based combat, then deal with the slower but harder-hitting infantry form. Rokan goes straight for the horse. 2 strikes to the leg joints, 1 to the neck. The mount collapses. The general hits the ground, starts charging its spiritual transformation phase, a secondary form that wraps it in a spectral energy field and ramps its attack speed by 60%. The transformation takes 8 seconds to complete. Rokan doesn't give it 8 seconds. He's already inside the general's guard before the transformation animation finishes its first frame, and the follow-up strike that ends the fight hits, before the system can register the phase shift as valid. Boss dead, transformation cancelled, rare drop collected. He's level 32 when he walks back out through the pottery stall. The wildling territory sits to the northwest of Kato, sharing a contested forest border with the orc camp. The 2 factions have a tense, established non-aggression arrangement, not peace exactly, but a structured avoidance of direct conflict. They both know they're roughly evenly matched. Neither side has the resources to win a full war cleanly, and the status quo keeps both factions functional. Rokan decides to end the status quo. He enters the orc camp during a standard patrol window, locates the weapon storage, specifically the ceremonial war axes that the orc clan uses for formal declarations of hostility, the ones with distinctive clan engravings that any wildling scout would immediately recognize. He takes 3 of them. Just 3. Enough to be found, not enough to look like a raid. Then he crosses the forest border into wildling territory, finds a wildling patrol path, and plants the axes in a shallow, concealed position just off the trail. Close enough that the patrol will find them within an hour. Far enough from the actual border that they couldn't have fallen there accidentally. He leaves. No witness, no combat log, no system notification. Within 2 hours, the wildling elders have called an emergency tribal assembly. The orc clan's response is confused. Their war axes are missing, the wildlings are presenting them as evidence of hostile incursion, and the orc leadership can't explain the gap in their own inventory without admitting to a lapse in security that makes them look weak. Both factions mobilize. The border patrol density triples on both sides. Scouts start getting into skirmishes. The non-aggression arrangement collapses in about 6 hours, which in game terms means both factions start generating active battlefield events along the entire forest boundary. Rokan positions himself at the central clearing, where the 2 faction leaders are going to meet for their inevitable direct confrontation, a formal duel that both sides view as the most honor-preserving way to escalate, because an open war declaration requires council consensus that neither side has fully built yet. He watches the duel. Both leaders are elite-tier NPCs, high-level, carrying unique faction weapons. The fight is spectacular. After several minutes of genuine back-and-forth, one leader falls. The other stands, wounded, beginning the formal declaration that will trigger the official war event. Rokan executes him, clean, fast. From outside the duel's formal boundary zone, which the game treats as a non-restricted combat area for non-participants. The duel was a player exclusion zone. It wasn't excluding random interference from outside its perimeter. Both faction leaders are dead. The tribal war never formally begins because the declaration never gets completed. Both factions enter a state of disorganized crisis leadership. Rokan collects the unique drops from both NPC corpses, triggers the hidden achievement tied to causing a political destabilization event through environmental manipulation, and claims the title Conqueror of the Forest. The community forums spend 3 days theorizing about why the wildling orc faction war spontaneously collapsed before it even started. The real world keeps happening between sessions. Rokan logs out of the game and realizes 2 things. First, his secret tomb dungeon location is unique intelligence that organized guilds would pay heavily for, not the loot from the dungeon, but the location data itself, which they can use to run scheduled farm rotations. Second, his cheating ex-girlfriend Lim is standing 30 meters away from him on the street, looking exactly as irritating as he remembers. He handles the dungeon first. The auction house for information assets is a semi-legitimate market that runs through encrypted forums rather than the game's official trade system. Rokan lists the tomb location data with a fixed price tag and zero negotiation, attaching a verified completion screenshot and a partial route map. A reputable guild matches the asking price inside 40 minutes. Transaction complete. He never has to interact with them directly. The limb situation he handles by walking the other direction. But she's a thread he's aware of, because in his original timeline she deployed her brothers to physically harass him at least twice when he was focused on grinding, and her new partner, a player named Pyrrha, leader of a refined image guild faction called MP Guild, has a history of using edited video clips and social media campaigns to manufacture public drama against players he personally dislikes. Pyrrha can't beat Rokan in the game. He knows this, so he'll try to beat him outside of it. Rokan makes a note of the timeline and keeps moving. The real estate opportunity is next. He uses the identity disguise skill, an early Berserker utility that lets him present an alternate character profile during non-combat interactions, to run a sequence of property transactions across the city center. 3-bedroom apartments. He buys every single one currently listed in the central district. All of them. He purchases through 4 different apparent identities to avoid the system flagging it as monopoly behavior under the game's economic rules. By the time the last transaction clears, Rokan owns the entire 3-bedroom market in the city center. He immediately relists every property at triple the previous price. Any player or NPC who needs central district housing over the next 2 weeks is paying his inflated rate or moving to the outskirts. The gold starts flowing in without him needing to do anything. The Bloodhunters are Kato's most active PK guild, player killers who run organized ambushes on solo targets in the wilderness zones outside city limits. They have a coordinated team structure, 2 frontline bruisers, a shadow position archer, a support caster running defensive buffs, and a squad leader who handles target selection and engagement timing. In Rokan's original timeline, this guild eventually becomes a significant player in the Ragnarok faction. Their leader, a man known as Cabal, quietly ranks 8th in Ragnarok's hierarchy. He's a shadow mage, a hidden class that uses poison layering and blind spot positioning to control fights before the opponent realizes the engagement has started. They ambush Rokan in the wilderness east of Kato. Cabal knows who Rokan is, the oddly effective level 1 who's been generating quiet noise across the server, and has specifically targeted him for an example elimination. The ambush timing is clean. Rokan is between zones, no city safety protocols active, no nearby witnesses. The bruisers move in from both sides. The archer has a line from elevated terrain. The support caster starts the defensive rotation. Cabal hangs back in his shadow state. Rokan looks at the incoming bruisers, calculates the archer's most efficient line-of-sight position, and decides to deal with the archer first. He catches the first arrow, with his hand. Not a special skill, pure physical reflex, raw stat expression. The archer processes this information and fires the second arrow immediately because the manual says that's the counter. Rokan catches the second one too. Then he closes the distance to the archer's position at a speed that the elevated terrain advantage doesn't compensate for, grabs the archer's bow arm, and tears it off. Not metaphorically, the system processes this as a critical dismemberment attack. The bruisers freeze. The support caster's defensive rotation breaks. Cabal in his shadow state attempts a poison layering combo from behind, the standard Shadow Mage opener that builds 5 stacking toxin debuffs before the target even knows they've been hit. Rokan pulls out the yellow lightning orb he's been carrying since the Plague Dungeon, the minor magical trinket he complained about because it felt like an emergency-only item. He activates it as Cabal steps out of the shadow positioning. Static discharge, 5-second stun. Cabal's shadow substitute cycle, the mechanic that should have let him take 0 damage on the first counter, breaks because the stun interrupts the cycle's active frame. Rokan walks through the stun window and ends the fight. Cabal logs out. The Bloodhunters scatter. The wilderness zone returns to normal. Rokan deposits the rare items he took off the team, marks Cabal's guild affiliation in his personal notes under Ragnarok, future problem, and continues toward his next objective. The Lizardman habitat requires an item, a specific alchemical compound that unlocks the zone's entrance gates and establishes provisional faction neutrality with the Lizardman population inside. The compound is part of a vendor NPC's side quest chain that takes about 4 hours to complete. Gather reagents, process them through a specific crafting sequence, deliver the result, collect the compound, proceed. Rokan checks the public auction house, finds 2 units of the compound listed by a player who cleared the quest chain yesterday and decided to sell the excess. Buys both for a fraction of the time the quest would have cost, and walks straight to the habitat entrance. The Lizardman Zone is a mid-tier area with complex enemy movement patterns. The creatures use pack hunting behaviors that punish solo players who get caught in open terrain without cover. The dungeon at the zone's center is a fountain trial, a hidden underground chamber built around a central water feature that contains a legendary helmet artifact. Getting to the fountain requires navigating a trap hallway. Pressure-activated floor mechanisms that trigger dart volleys from the walls, timed in a pattern that assumes players will slow down to observe and time their movement. The hallway is designed for careful, methodical traversal. Rokan activates Berserker mode and runs straight through it. The darts hit him, all of them. His Berserker state damage resistance combined with his raw endurance stats means the total damage from the entire trap hallway equals roughly what a single Lizardman pack encounter would deal. He clears the hallway in 4 seconds and deactivates the traps permanently by destroying the central trigger mechanism at the far end. The Fountain Chamber's trial is a desire illusion, a magical construct that generates a personalized temptation vision for the entering player, tailored to their deepest psychological attachment. The game reads character history and relationship data to build the illusion. For a player with strong social bonds, guild loyalty, romantic connections, the illusion has a lot to work with. Rokan has spent years as a ruthless solo player with no meaningful in-game attachments and exactly one emotional reference point he's trying to destroy. The illusion flickers, generates something vague and unconvincing, and dissolves. He walks past it, reaches the fountain's core chamber, and collects the Lion King's helmet, a legendary tier piece with fire resistance stats that most players won't encounter for another 40 levels of content. He puts it on and keeps moving. Helios finds him 2 days later. Helios is a fire magic swordsman, a hybrid class that integrates elemental channeling directly into blade technique, generating flame projections off standard combat strikes and building toward a high-tier explosion ability that detonates in a 30-meter radius. He runs with a 5-man squad of coordinated players who treat ambushing solo targets as content. They're well-funded, well-equipped, and operating at a level range where they should be comfortably above anything Rokan can deal with visibly. The squad springs the ambush in a canyon approach east of the fountain dungeon. Helios opens with his explosion, not as a finisher, as an opener, because against most targets this ends the engagement immediately. 30-meter detonation radius, serious fire damage. The blast wave alone generates knockback that sends ungrounded targets into the canyon walls. Rokan is wearing the Lion King's helmet. The helmet's fire resistance absorbs the primary damage. The knockback catches him for half a second. He steps out of the dissipating flame cloud, looks at Helios across the scorched canyon floor, and Helios has a very specific expression that players get when they've just dumped their biggest ability into a target who is still standing. The squad begins their secondary assault formation. Rokan closes the gap to Helios before they can complete it, delivers the strike sequence he's been building his Berserker skill chain toward, and Helios goes down in a single devastating exchange. The rest of the squad breaks formation. You cannot maintain coordinated engagement when the primary damage dealer drops in under 5 seconds. Rokan works through them individually, systematically, without hurry, because none of them can threaten him without Helios anchoring the formation. He loots the bodies, collects a rare cloak of stealth off the squad leader, and leaves the canyon. The wider player community starts paying attention. Whoever this level 1 Berserker is, this nobody with no listed achievements and no guild tag, keeps showing up in combat logs that don't make sense. Players are starting to post on forums asking who he is. Rokan doesn't respond. He's busy running real estate. The inflated 3-bedroom monopoly runs for 2 weeks before the system's economic balancing protocol flags the listings as anomalous pricing and generates a price ceiling alert. Rokan cashes out just before the ceiling triggers, deposits a substantial gold reserve, and begins considering the next income stream. The answer turns out to be swords. He finds a reliable NPC blacksmith in Kato's craftsman district, who will accept commission work from players with sufficient reputation standing. A threshold Rokan hit quietly through his city guard interactions and the plague dungeon resolution. He commissions a batch of mid-tier longswords. Standard materials, clean craftsmanship, nothing extraordinary about the output. Then he names them. The King. He brands every sword in the batch with the title, lists them in the auction house with a short product description that references the King of Violence moniker, his own title from his previous timeline, a name the current game's player base doesn't yet know, and prices them at 300% above comparable weapon listings. The first two sell immediately to players who assume the premium price signals quality they're missing. Those players equip the swords. Other players see the name. The branding propagates. Within a week, the King has become a recognized luxury label in Kato's weapon market. Because players are social creatures who assign quality to things other players are visibly purchasing. The swords are not better than their price competitors. The brand is better than their price competitors. Rokan keeps commissioning, keeps listing, and the gold accumulates. He stops at 500,000 coins, just before the system flags his market behavior as manipulation. 500,000 gold. From swords with a made-up brand and a name nobody recognized when he started. He pays off every debt, covers 3 months of real-world rent, and deposits the remainder for his next major purchase. The corrupted half-elf forest is northeast of Kato, and it's one of those zones that looks like optional content, but contains a progression gate disguised as an exploration quest. A sacred sapling at the forest's heart has been corrupted by dark energy. The corruption is spreading outward through the root system, causing the forest's guardian spirit to become aggressive toward any intruder, including allied faction members. The intended questline solution is a 2-part process. Find the sapling, gather purification materials from the zone's secondary dungeon, use them in a cleansing ritual, and wait for the guardian to return to neutral alignment. Total process: roughly 8 hours of active play, plus a 6-hour in-game timer for the cleansing to complete. Rokan carries his own high-tier healing potions, not combat potions, restorative compounds he's been stacking from dungeon drops that were designed to accelerate biological recovery in players. He checks the game's item interaction system and confirms what he suspected. The healing compound's restoration properties register as purification energy to corrupted organic structures. He walks to the sapling and pours a healing potion directly on its roots. The sapling's growth accelerates visibly. The corruption retreats through the root system in under a minute. The 6-hour cleansing timer doesn't trigger because the potion bypassed the ritual mechanic entirely. The questline registers completion, and the Guardian, a level 135 armored forest spirit with health regeneration linked to the sapling's connection to the forest root network, suddenly finds that its health regen has been severed, because the sapling is now restored and the connection has been rebalanced. The Guardian attacks anyway. It doesn't know the quest is done. It's a guardian spirit, its behavioral loop is protection, and there's an intruder present. Rokan triggers his Berserker beast state. The Guardian's health regen was its primary defensive characteristic. Without it, its raw durability is significant but finite. The beast state amplifies Rokan's attack output past the Guardian's base defense threshold, and the central purple core, the structural anchor for the Guardian's form, takes direct damage for the first time in the fight. 6 strikes to the core, distributed across a dodge and counter rhythm that keeps Rokan out of the Guardian's most damaging sweeping attacks. The core shatters, the Guardian dissolves. The Elven High Society NPCs register the quest completion. Note that the restoration was accomplished without the ritual materials they supplied, and respond to this by immediately elevating Rokan's standing to honored guest status. Political access, merchant discounts. Quest availability for high society storylines most players never unlock. He files this under useful and moves on to Crossroad. Crossroad is the third city and the first real hub. The point where the game's tutorial scaffolding fully drops away and the genuine mid-game content opens up. It hosts multiple NPC races, elves, dwarves, gnomes, each with their own district, faction questlines, and merchant networks. The player population here is dense, competitive, and largely organized into guilds that control territory, dungeon access, and market pricing. Rokan arrives on a gnome cargo cart, not a hired transport, a gnome-operated industrial hauler that's technically a player-accessible vehicle but requires either a gnome-class player's authorization or a specific item clearance. He has neither. He talked the gnome operator into letting him ride by offering to clear the bandit threat on the road ahead, then walked ahead of the cart, cleared the bandits in under 4 minutes, waved the cart forward, and climbed aboard. The cart moves at an objectively dangerous speed because gnome engineering principles prioritize efficiency over passenger comfort. Rokan holds on with one hand and watches the map scroll on his interface. The city comes into view, and he sees the global feed notification. Odin is forming Ragnarok. Official announcement. Player recruitment posts going live on every major forum. The guild structure is being assembled, ranked positions, contribution requirements, territory ambitions. In Rokan's previous timeline, Ragnarok became the largest and most powerful guild in the game's history before they used that power to destroy him. Now they're in their founding week, and they don't know he's watching. He stares at the notification for a long moment, then he opens his skill interface and starts combining abilities. Madness Cry is a skill he's been building toward, a convergence of two baseline Berserker physical abilities combined with a magical conversion trait he picked up in the Fountain Dungeon. The combination generates a battle cry with a 12-meter radius that inflicts raw psychological pressure on enemies, forcing a brief disorientation status while simultaneously amplifying Rokan's own combat stats. It's not a subtle skill. It announces him. It says that whoever this is, they are not here to negotiate. He locks the combination. Madness Cry activates. The gnome cart driver jumps half a meter off his seat. Rokan saves it. He's going to need it eventually. The Cobalt mine sits underneath the dwarven district of Crossroad, and it's been infested for 3 weeks. Cobalt crawlers, insectoid creatures that burrow through stone and feed on mineral deposits, have overrun the lower shafts. The dwarven miners are trapped in the upper levels, the ore output has flatlined, and the mining guild is offering a substantial reward for anyone who can clear the infestation and get production running again. It's a publicly listed bounty quest. Plenty of players have attempted it. The problem is that cobalt crawlers operate in swarm behavior. Killing one triggers a chemical signal that draws every other crawler within a 100-meter radius, which means a standard combat approach generates an exponentially growing mob within seconds of the first engagement. Rokan goes to the mine and immediately locates the cart track system, the industrial rail line the dwarves use to move ore loads between the shaft levels. The carts are still operational. The track runs from the upper loading bay down through the infestation zone to the lower ore face in a single continuous slope. He loads the heaviest cart with every loose piece of mining equipment he can find in the upper bay. Pickaxes, support beams, empty ore buckets, a winch assembly, releases the brake and rides it down. The cart hits the crawler swarm at full speed and tears through the leading edge of the colony before the chemical signal can fully propagate. The swarm tries to concentrate toward the disturbance, but the cart is moving faster than their coordination response. Rokan rides through the chaos, identifies the colony's central nest chamber, and drops off the cart at the entrance to the nest. Here the swarm is densest. He activates Berserker state, generates Madness Cry inside the enclosed chamber. The 12-meter radius in a sealed stone room bounces the psychological pressure effect off the walls, effectively expanding its functional radius, and works through the concentrated colony while the disorientation status is active. Total clear time, 22 minutes. He walks the trapped dwarven miners out through the cleared shafts, collects the bounty reward, and the mining guild's lead smith, a scarred veteran dwarf named Gorak who hasn't smiled in approximately 6 years according to his NPC dialogue flags, personally offers Rokan a permanent blacksmithing discount. Priority access to enhancement services, materials sourcing at cost. This matters enormously. Enhancement in the Lord is a brutal mechanic. Improving gear past a certain baseline requires rare scrolls, precise craftsmanship, and a failure rate that regularly destroys the enhancement stones you're spending. Having a top-tier smith on personal terms is the difference between being able to force gear to level 9 and grinding for an extra 2 months hoping the RNG cooperates. Rokan shakes Gorek's hand, notes the discount in his resources log, and goes back to the surface. The gnome mechanical trial is next, a city registration requirement for anyone seeking official part-time guard status under Crossroads General Malson. The Gnome Engineering District runs a standardized aptitude assessment, navigate a mechanical puzzle sequence, demonstrate basic maintenance competence on a gnome-designed device, and pass a timed cleaning sweep through a small automated facility without triggering any of its internal alarm systems. Players generally find this either easy and boring or unexpectedly humiliating, depending on whether they've ever paid attention to gnome questlines. The alarm systems in particular are notorious. They're calibrated for gnome scale sensitivity, which means anything above a certain movement speed or impact force triggers them. Large character builds struggle badly with this. Rokan completes it with time to spare, mostly because his years of studying hidden game mechanics included a period where he mapped gnome engineering logic for fun. He treats the puzzle sequence like a familiar exam he's already taken. General Malson receives him in the guard headquarters afterward. Malson is a level 200 half-elf, enormous, built like a fortification wall, with combat scars mapped across his arms in a pattern that suggests he's been in continuous warfare for approximately his entire life. He has no patience for political players, polished presentations, or anyone who wastes his time with formalities. His assessment method is simple. He asks candidates what their actual combat philosophy is, listens for about 15 seconds, and decides. Rokan tells him, plainly, that he hits things until they stop moving and builds his kit around hitting them fast enough that they don't get a turn. Malson looks at him for a moment, then nods. Guard authorization granted. This is not a small thing. City Guard status in Crossroad gives Rokan legal arrest authority over flagged PK players within city limits and the contested zones around the city border. Players who've been marked as Crimson Killers, flagged for attacking regular players without provocation, can be detained, processed, and drained of a portion of their accumulated gold as a fine. The fine goes to the guard operating the arrest. Rokan immediately begins patrolling. Within his first week, he processes 14 flagged PK players, collects a significant fine sum, and arrests 3 members of a guild that had been running a protection racket in the merchant district. He also encounters a tiny gnome-class player named Midi, who specializes entirely in evasion mechanics and has been running circles around the standard guard patrol routes for weeks. Rokan spends 20 minutes trying to catch Midi using conventional movement before abandoning conventional movement entirely and simply predicting where the evasion pattern terminates. He catches Midi in the arrest zone before Midi realizes the prediction was happening. Midi's expression upon being caught, according to the NPC dialogue flag, is the gnome equivalent of genuinely impressed. Baron True lives in a manor on the elevated western district of Crossroad, a gated estate with an NPC staff of 8, a private dungeon access beneath the cellar, and a carefully maintained social reputation as a generous patron of the arts. The arts in question are funded by bleeding a captive high elf noble named Iraheim, who has been locked in an enchanted slumber in his cellar for approximately 4 years, her blood drawn on a regular schedule to supply the vampire baron's longevity regimen. The quest line that exposes this is a standard investigation chain, NPC reports of missing persons, a trail of purchased blood restoration items in the merchant logs, eventual access to the manor during a social event. Most players who reach this point are equipped with vampire hunting items, holy damage amplifiers, and at least one healer in the party to counter the blood drain attack the Baron uses in his combat form. Rokan's approach to the Iraheim situation is to find her first. He enters the manor during True's scheduled social reception, public event, technically open access, and while True is managing his guests on the upper floor, Rokan locates the cellar access, bypasses the lock using his city guard authority as a search and detain pretext, and finds Iraheim in the slumber chamber. The slumber is a high-tier sleeping curse, the kind that doesn't respond to standard dispel mechanics, healing magic, or physical waking attempts. Its design spec is that it requires a specialized counter ritual using rare components that the questline directs players to gather. This is a 2 to 3 hour side loop before the confrontation with True even begins. Rokan checks his inventory. He built a mechanical alarm clock during his downtime grinding sessions in Pocket City, a hobby project he worked on during off hours because he found the engineering questlines relaxing and because he had a memory from his original timeline of thinking the mechanic would eventually be useful. Other players who saw him working on it called it a waste of time. There's no alarm clock skill, there's no alarm clock achievement, it's just a loud machine. He sets it for maximum volume and places it directly next to Iraheim's head. The alarm goes off. The sleeping curse shatters under the acoustic impact, not because the clock has magical properties, but because the curse's maintenance condition requires environmental stillness above a specific threshold, and the alarm clock's decibel output exceeds that threshold by a factor of approximately 3. It's a mechanical workaround for a magical problem. Iraheim wakes up furious, immediately demands to know who is making that noise, then processes the fact that she is no longer in an enchanted slumber, that the cellar is open, and that there is a person standing in front of her who she does not recognize holding an alarm clock. The conversation that follows is brief. She understands the situation. She agrees to leave through the rear garden while Rokan handles the Baron. True discovers his cellar has been accessed at almost exactly this moment. He descends the stairs in his combat form, Vampire Noble, significantly enhanced speed and strength, blood drain ability that regenerates his health as a percentage of damage dealt, and a mist shift defensive mechanic that converts him to an ethereal state for 3 seconds when hit with a critical strike. Rokan uses Wind Wheel, a spinning axe throw skill he developed by combining baseline throwing mechanics with a rotational force modifier from his Berserker kit. The axe generates a lateral cutting force on its arc that doesn't register as a single critical strike. It registers as continuous damage. The mist shift mechanic requires a critical hit to trigger. Wind Wheel never triggers it. He throws the axe at the top of the cellar staircase, carving through the structural supports that hold the upper floor access point. The ceiling section above True collapses. True moves to mist shift, can't trigger it because the damage isn't a critical, takes the full structural impact, and drops into a crater in the cellar floor. Rokan retrieves his axe, finishes the fight, and carries the drop upstairs. Irahame is waiting in the rear garden. She offers a formal dinner invitation, a genuine gesture, not a questline prompt. She's been trapped for 4 years, and the first person to get her out used an alarm clock. She finds this worth acknowledging. Rokan politely declines, citing his grinding schedule. Irahame stares at him for a moment, then she formally extends her hand. Rokan accepts, a formal hand kiss gesture that in Elven diplomatic protocol constitutes a permanent soul bond, granting him access to Elven high society political networks and a standing invitation to High Council events. He earns the legendary item Irahame's Oath from the interaction, a passive accessory that grants social standing bonuses in all elf-adjacent political contexts, and heads to the White Coast. The White Coast is a shoreline zone where a specific creature spawns during a narrow daily window, the Blade Demon, a fast-moving aquatic predator that generates a self-destruction mode when its health drops below 30%. The self-destruction is a 25-second countdown that ends in an explosion covering a 20-meter radius. Most players either kill it fast enough before the mode triggers, or run far enough away that they survive the blast and collect the drop afterward. Rokan plans to be inside the explosion radius when it goes off. The Blade Demon drops a permanent bleeding buff when killed while a player is maintaining active physical contact at the moment of self-destruction detonation. It's an obscure mechanic that nobody has documented because nobody has survived testing it. The bleeding buff applies to the primary weapon, stacking a damage over time effect onto every physical strike indefinitely. He baits the demon into its self-destruction mode at the 31% health mark, activates Destruction Burst, a Berserker ability that temporarily inverts incoming damage into a damage resistance buffer, and tanks the full 25-second countdown while the demon is trying to break contact. The explosion hits him for significant damage. Destruction Burst converts the first half of it. His raw endurance absorbs the rest, leaving him at about 15% health, singed, standing in the middle of a crater on a beach. The bleeding buff applies to his primary war axe. He checks the stat, sees the permanent icon, and allows himself a moment of quiet satisfaction before drinking a health potion. The axe now bleeds everything it touches. Every fight going forward has a damage component that never stops ticking. The sunken shipwreck sits off the White Coast in a section of seabed that requires underwater movement skills most players don't bother acquiring. The wreck contains a legendary item, the Lion King's symbol, a chest piece accessory that completes the Lion King set when combined with the helmet he already has. But the wreck is guarded by Captain Murloc, a level-appropriate aquatic boss with a unique combat adaptation. Underwater, its movement speed doubles, while every standard combat skill's effectiveness is halved due to resistance reduction in the aquatic environment. Rokan equips his full movement kit, activates his aquatic adaptation passive, another minor achievement reward that most players never unlock because it requires completing an optional underwater exploration quest, and dives. The fight against Murloc is the most technically demanding combat sequence he's faced so far. Underwater movement creates genuine three-dimensional positioning requirements that his standard ground combat rhythm doesn't fully accommodate. Murloc exploits the vertical axis consistently, attacking from below when Rokan positions at mid-depth, shifting to lateral runs when Rokan drops lower. He adapts in real time, reading Murloc's movement telegraph from the pressure wake it generates in the water ahead of its strikes. By the fourth exchange, he has the pattern mapped. He times the Crimson Strike loop, his fastest physical attack sequence, to land during Murloc's lateral run phase, when its movement commitment prevents direction changes. 7 runs of the loop. Murloc drops. He surfaces with the Lion King symbol, equips it alongside the helmet, and feels the set bonus activate, a significant amplification to his physical stat output that applies whenever both pieces are equipped simultaneously. He's now wearing legendary gear that players won't even find the quest lines for until they're 30 levels above him visibly. The guard operation back in Crossroad produces a profitable sideline. Rokan establishes a specific enforcement pattern. He identifies PK guild members who are flagged but operating near the city border, close enough to the city's jurisdiction line that their exact legal status is ambiguous. He uses his guard authority to classify them as within jurisdiction, arrests them, and processes the fine. Several players contest this. He lets them go through the official dispute process, which takes 48 hours, during which they're confined to the detention zone. By the time the dispute resolves, sometimes in their favor, sometimes not, Rokan has already moved on to the next arrest. The detention zone fills. Several competitive guilds lodge formal complaints with the city guard administration. General Malson reviews the complaints, notes that the jurisdictional interpretations are aggressive but technically defensible, and declines to override them. Rokan also discovers that Pyrrha, his ex-girlfriend's new partner, is operating within Crossroads' competitive guild structure. MP Guild has a presence in the Merchant District, running a polished public image operation with coordinated social media posts and streaming highlights carefully curated to show Pyrrha and his players in the most favorable possible light. He files this information. He's not ready to move on Pyrrha yet. He has a lake to visit. The Lake Guardian lives in the reservoir at the center of the Crossroad Wilderness Zone, a level 100 aquatic creature that serves as the regional boss for the entire Crossroad area. It's meant to be a capstone fight, the achievement that proves a player has completed the Crossroad content tier and is ready to advance to the 4th city, Timor. Standard clear method is a raid group of 20 to 30 players at appropriate level, with dedicated tank rotation to handle the Guardian's liquid barrier mechanic, a defensive shell of pressurized water that regenerates continuously from the lake itself, requiring sustained damage above a specific threshold per second to break through before it resets. Rokan is level 60-something visible. The Guardian is level 100. He's not doing this the standard way. He spends 3 days researching the Guardian's barrier mechanic through old community posts. Not the current game's wiki, but obscure early access testing logs from before the game launched publicly that he remembers from his previous timeline. The barrier resets on a timer, not on a damage threshold. Specifically, it resets every 15 seconds unless the incoming damage during that window exceeds a fixed value. The community has always treated this as a sustained DPS check. It isn't. It's a burst window check. He doesn't need to deal high damage for a long time. He needs to deal high damage in one concentrated sequence every 15 seconds. He enters the lake, activates every damage amplification title and skill he carries, chains Madness Cry into a Destruction Burst opener to maximize his physical stat output for the first 6 seconds, then delivers the entire accumulated burst into the barrier's anchor point, the structural node at the Guardian's chest that the barrier regenerates from. The barrier breaks. The Guardian is exposed for the window before it regenerates. Rokan hits the exposed form with his Bleeding Axe strike sequence. The barrier comes back. He waits 13 seconds, resets his burst chain, and does it again. Repeat 12 times. The Guardian drops. The legendary stat title appears in his achievement log, a permanent critical damage amplification that applies to all physical strikes against targets above his visible level. Given that he fights above his visible level constantly, this title is going to affect nearly every engagement for the foreseeable future. He accepts it and starts preparing for Timor. The graveyard system between Crossroad and Timor is a transitional zone that players call the Death Road, a densely packed series of graveyards, haunted barrows, and bone-structured dungeons that serve as the level bridge between the two cities. Standard players run the Death Road in organized groups, progressing from the outer graveyard sections through the cave networks toward the Timor border. Rokan runs it solo and fast, using his accumulated stat advantage to push through encounter groups at a pace that earns him level progress without requiring careful tactical management of each engagement. By the midsection of the Death Road, he's well into the 80s. The bandit stronghold he finds along an unmarked trail off the main Death Road path is not on any community map. It's tucked into a canyon side, run by a coordinated bandit faction with genuine military structure. Not random spawn bandits, but organized NPCs with patrol rotations and a leadership chain. Inside the Stronghold's command room, he finds a logbook that maps a hidden graveyard entrance, a back route into the Cave of Death, the Death Road's central dungeon, that bypasses the standard locked entrance gate, requiring a party minimum of 8 players. He takes the logbook, finds the entrance, and goes in alone. The Cave of Death's Skeleton General is a significantly harder version of the Tomb Dungeon boss he cleared in Kato. Similar mounted structure, similar transformation phase, but with a secondary ability, spectral lance throws that track toward the target's predicted movement path rather than their current position. Fighting it conventionally means getting hit by lances aimed at where you're going, not where you are. Rokan's solution is to be less predictable than the tracking algorithm expects. He establishes an irregular movement pattern, not random, but specifically arrhythmic, in a way that causes the prediction model to accumulate errors. The lances consistently land slightly behind his actual position. He dismounts the horse with 2 focus strikes, interrupts the transformation phase before it completes, and finishes the general. He walks out of the Cave of Death at level 90, takes the gnome cart toward the Crossroad Timor border, and triggers his 3rd Berserker class milestone, the advancement that deepens his skill mastery to a level where the custom ability combinations he's built start generating secondary effects that the original base skills don't contain. Madness Cry now leaves a residual pressure field for 4 seconds after activation. Wind Wheel now generates a cutting vortex on the return arc. Destruction Burst now converts a percentage of absorbed damage into a temporary attack rating bonus that persists for the next 6 strikes after the absorption window closes. His kit is no longer powerful, it's architectural. Timor is where the game becomes genuinely dangerous. The 4th city operates at level requirements above 100, which means the population here is exclusively advanced players and high-tier NPCs. The faction war between Golden Lion and Black Dragon is fully active in this region. Both camps run coordinated operations, territory shifts happen daily, and the contested zones outside city limits are open PvP with no safety protocols. Rokan registers as a Golden Lion mercenary on his first day in Timor, not out of faction loyalty, but because the Golden Lion camp's territory gives him access to specific dungeon routes that he needs, and the mercenary contract pays in merit points that can be exchanged for rare enhancement materials. He finds a cave halfway up the Supply Canyon wall on the eastern approach, a natural formation that sits directly above the main route that Black Dragon supply troops use to move resources between outposts. He excavates a stable firing position, sets up a supply stock of throwing axes, and spends a productive afternoon dropping 98 axes onto passing Black Dragon formations from above. He hits level 150 from this alone. The Black Dragon camp registers an unusual pattern in their casualty logs: heavy losses on the supply route with no visible attacker, and dispatches a scouting unit to investigate the canyon approach. Rokan watches the scouts from his elevated position, notes that they're looking at ground level for hidden combatants, and leaves the cave before they think to look up. He posts bait online, not in the game, on the streaming and forum platforms where serious players maintain public presence. A short post, ostensibly from a mid-tier player discussing optimal routes through the Timor contested zone, with just enough genuine tactical detail to read as credible, and just enough incorrectness to be interesting to anyone who wants to correct it publicly. 3 PK groups from the Black Dragon camp take the bait. They show up in the flag zone looking for easy targets and find Rokan. He lets them establish their formation first. Then he activates Madness Cry, Destruction Burst, and Wind Wheel in sequence. The combined effect generates a whirlwind zone around his position that catches the outer ring of the formation in the Cry's disorientation field, while the burst's absorption buffer handles the initial concentrated fire. He's live on stream, his own stream, which he started running quietly after the Crossroad Guard operation, because he recognized early that public documentation of his legitimate combat methods was a future insurance policy against whatever Pyrrha eventually tried. 30,000 viewers watch him dismantle 3 coordinated PK groups inside 4 minutes. The stream clip circulates. Players start seriously asking who he is. His viewer count doubles overnight. Tides is the one who decides to make it a direct confrontation. Tides is a Black Dragon Orc player, loudly self-proclaimed first-level 100 ranker in the Timor region, heavily followed, running a loud streaming presence built around the narrative that he's the strongest physical player in the game. His combat footage is carefully edited. Long fights cut to highlight moments, group content credited to him individually. The camera angle consistently chosen to make his potion consumption less visible than it is. He challenges Rokan publicly, on stream, with 30,000 of his own viewers watching. The framing is clean. Tides is the established regional powerhouse, and Rokan is an upstart who's been generating noise. This is where the noise gets quieted. Rokan accepts. The fight lasts under 90 seconds. Tides opens with his signature combo, a level 100 Orc Berserker chain that generates massive momentum-based damage through successive impact stacking. It's a powerful sequence. Against a comparably leveled opponent without Rokan's specific stat configuration, it would build quickly into an unanswerable damage loop. Rokan takes the first hit of the chain, which triggers Destruction Burst's absorption buffer, then steps inside Tide's recovery frame, the fraction of a second between the chain's third and fourth strikes, and delivers a single retaliatory blow that bypasses the momentum stack entirely because it's not hitting the armor, it's hitting the joint. Tides goes down face first, into the soil, in front of 30,000 live viewers plus Rokan's own simultaneous stream audience. Rokan looks at the camera for a moment, then he walks away. The clip runs for 6 straight days on every major gaming platform. The comment sections are approximately what you'd expect. The Hellhound Guild encounters him next, and they're less interested in a clean fight. Hellhound is a Tamor-based guild that has been running an aggressive market control operation, monopolizing access to the central continent's rare dungeon nodes by establishing blocking camps at dungeon entrances and charging access fees. They're not PK players technically. They don't kill people, they just stand in the way and charge rent for passage. It's legally within the game's faction rules. It's also the kind of behavior that generates a specific quality of resentment among the player base. They make the mistake of trying to block Rokan's access to a dungeon he specifically needs for the next stage of his gear enhancement plan. He offers to pay the fee. They double it, because they've identified him and decided making his day difficult is worth the social credit in their guild chat. He pays the doubled fee, enters the dungeon, completes it, comes back out, notes which guild members were on the blocking detail, and spends the next 3 days systematically tracking Hellhound's guild operations through the Fog Canyon system east of Tamor. He locates their staging ground. He finds the zombie pass routes that run through the canyon's lower sections, paths that activate undead spawn chains when crossed, designed as a natural hazard the canyon's dungeon map warns players to avoid. He times Hellhound's regular patrol cycles against the zombie spawn timing. Then he arranges for their patrol rotation to be slightly delayed, a fabricated tip about a rare spawn in the opposite direction, posted anonymously on a secondary forum account. The patrol goes to check. They come back late. They cross the zombie pass routes at the wrong time. The zombie spawn chain activates behind them, cutting off their exit paths. In front of them is Rokan. Their guild leader attempts a formal surrender. Rokan has watched this same leader laugh at players who offered surrender at his dungeon entrances for the past 3 months. He's familiar with how Hellhound responds to surrender. He ends the fight. He takes their guild charter item as a trophy, a game mechanic that formally disbands a guild when the charter is forcibly taken from the leader. Hellhound ceases to exist as an organization in the space of an afternoon. Lord Remington runs a private territory on the Tamor outskirts, a modest noble holding with a manor house, a resident NPC population, and a dungeon system underneath the grounds that Remington has been quietly keeping off the public map. The dungeon contains a killer bee colony, a high-density spawn of venomous aerial creatures that drop stinger components used in high-tier poison and paralytic crafting recipes. The stingers are worth significant gold on the open market. Remington has been harvesting them exclusively through his own channels and keeping the location undisclosed. Rokan shows up at the manor gate under the pretense of a routine territorial inspection. His Golden Lion mercenary contract gives him nominal authority to conduct resource assessments in allied noble holdings, a clause Remington clearly never expected anyone to actually invoke. Remington is not pleased. He is also, technically, legally obligated to permit the inspection. Rokan conducts it thoroughly. He finds the dungeon entrance behind the wine cellar, notes the killer bee colony density, observes the harvesting infrastructure Remington has built, and files a mental inventory of everything present. Then he takes a water bomb, a large-scale elemental explosive he crafted by combining his water element drops with an impact detonation casing, and drops it into the colony's central chamber. The water bomb detonates. The colony's ventilation structure floods. Bees respond to flooding by abandoning their defensive clustering behavior and going into open-air dispersal mode. Individually, they're dangerous but manageable. Collectively, they're a nightmare, and the flood forces the collective into individual dispersal. Rokan harvests stingers from the dispersed bees methodically, working the dungeon chamber by chamber, while Remington stands in his wine cellar listening to the sounds of his exclusive operation being taken apart by a mercenary inspector. The stingers go into Rokan's crafting inventory. The location data gets sold to the auction market the next morning. Remington files a formal complaint with the Golden Lion command structure. General Malson reviews it, notes that the inspection authority was legitimate and the water bomb constitutes a combat tool used within a dungeon zone, and declines to act on the complaint. The port operation is where Rokan stops operating solo and starts operating strategically. The Golden Lion faction needs the Central Continent's main port facility neutralized. The Black Dragon camp has established an intercontinental transit dock there that allows them to rapidly reinforce their Tamor positions from their home continent. As long as the dock operates, Black Dragon can sustain losses faster than Golden Lion can cause them. The port itself is heavily defended, a mixed force of Black Dragon players and high-level NPC troops, maritime artillery installations covering the approach routes, and a chain barrier across the harbor mouth that blocks naval access. Rokan doesn't approach it as a military commander. He approaches it as a demolitions problem. He spends 2 days positioning, mapping the dock's structural weak points, identifying the load-bearing components of the transit infrastructure, locating the harbor chain's anchor mechanisms on both sides of the mouth. He also identifies the dock's backup power system, which runs the maritime artillery on a separate circuit from the main facility. On the third day, he presents the Golden Lion Tactical Council with a complete operational plan. 1 entry point, 1 structural sequence. Estimated completion without reinforcement, 40 minutes. The council wants to send a full assault force. Rokan tells them the assault force will trigger the artillery backup system and result in heavy casualties before the chain is cut. He is not asking permission, he is providing information. He goes in alone. The port fight is a sequence of controlled destructions rather than a battle. He takes out the backup power relay first, a maintenance access point on the north dock wall that the artillery gunners don't cover because it's technically inside their own perimeter. Without backup power, the artillery switches to a manual reload cycle that quadruples its firing interval. Then he hits the chain anchor mechanisms. East side first, then west, crossing the dock at a speed that keeps him between the manual artillery's reload windows. Both anchors are destroyed. The chain drops. The transit dock's main structural pylons are last. 4 support columns that hold the entire dock platform above the waterline. He runs Windwheel through the first 2 in sequence, uses the return arc's cutting vortex to weaken the third, and physically collapses the fourth with a direct strike. The platform goes into the harbor in sections. 43 minutes total. The dock is gone. The Golden Lion Council, watching from the ridge above the port, has a collective reaction that lands somewhere between disbelief and religious experience. Rokan collects his merit point payout, exchanges it for enhancement materials, and takes the haul to Gorak. The gear enhancement session with Gorak is the most stressful 40 minutes Rokan has spent since regressing. Enhancement in the Lord is not a smooth progression. Every upgrade attempt past level 6 requires a rare enhancement stone, and the stones don't stack. Each attempt consumes 1 regardless of success or failure. Failure at level 7 doesn't just fail, it drops the item back to level 5. Failure at level 8 drops it to level 4. The failure rates at these levels hover between 30 and 45%, depending on the item quality and the smith's skill rating. Gorak is the highest skill-rated smith in Crossroad. His failure rates are the best available. They are still significant. Rokan has been banking enhancement stones systematically, farming them from a hidden spirit cavern he found in the Tamor wilderness, a cave that spawns crystalline elemental creatures that drop high-grade stones at better rates than any dungeon in the region. He has a stockpile. He has Gorak. He has accepted that some stones will burn. He watches Gorak work through the enhancement sequence on his primary war axe. Level 7, Success. Level 8, Failure. Back to 5. He keeps his expression neutral. Gorak doesn't comment. He tries again. Level 7, Success. Level 8, Success. Level 9 Attempt. The stone goes in. Gorak strikes. Level 9 activates. The War Axe's stat block updates. The combined effect of the level 9 enhancement with the permanent bleeding buff and his Lion King set bonus creates a physical damage output that, on paper, should not be possible at his visible level. On paper, it looks like a calculation error. It isn't. He gets his chest armor to level 8, his greaves to level 7, and decides to stop before he pushes the luck further. The gear is ready. He's ready. The desert is next. The desert zone between Timor and the Karas Empire's territory is the kind of area the game populates with area denial traps, environmental hazards designed to discourage solo exploration and funnel players toward the established routes. Sand trap pits, heat damage zones that drain endurance regeneration, and a specific community trap quest that the game presents as a group coordination challenge. The trap quest involves a village of desert-dwelling NPCs who have accidentally activated an ancient water mechanism beneath their settlement. A pressurized underground reservoir that is slowly destabilizing and will eventually detonate in a catastrophic flood event. The quest asks players to find a way to release the pressure safely. The intended solution is a 4-part disarming sequence that requires players stationed at 4 separate pressure release valves distributed across the underground chamber, all activated simultaneously. One person cannot be in 4 places simultaneously. Rokan enters the underground chamber, identifies the central pressure conduit, the main line that connects all 4 valve systems, and detonates a water bomb directly into it. The conduit absorbs the bomb's overpressure, routes it through all 4 valve lines simultaneously, and triggers all 4 releases at once from a single point of impact. The mechanism stabilizes, the quest completes, the village celebrates. He descends into the dungeon well at the settlement's edge, a flaming access shaft dropping into a volcanic subchamber, and finds the corrupted fire spirit core. The core is the source of the desert zone's heat damage field, a concentrated elemental entity that has been radiating thermal energy upward through the geological layer for years, turning the surface above it into an inhospitable wasteland. The fire spirit is not a cooperative entity. It attacks immediately, generating a temperature field around it that deals continuous thermal damage and periodically launches magma projectiles at irregular intervals. Standard approach is heavy fire resistance gear and range damage output. Rokan has the Lion King's helmet. He also has enough raw endurance at this point that the continuous thermal damage is manageable. He closes to melee range, absorbs the thermal field's continuous output, times his strike windows between the magma launches, which have a visible charge phase he reads from the spirit's energy concentration patterns, and destroys the core in a sustained close-range exchange that leaves him at 23% health. He drinks a potion on the way back up the shaft. The desert's heat damage field begins dissipating within an hour of the core's destruction. He doesn't stay to watch. He has a pyramid to enter. The legendary pyramids of the Karas Empire sit at the end of a desert approach road that most players can't access. The gate requires a hero's insignia badge, an item that doesn't drop from any standard dungeon, doesn't appear in any auction house listing, and isn't covered in any community guide because the players who've earned it aren't the type to post detailed write-ups. Rokan earned his from the Golden Lion Tactical Council as part of his port operation reward package. The council added it to the payout almost as an afterthought, not fully understanding what it meant to have it. He presents it at the pyramid gate, watches the stone mechanism respond to the badge, and enters. Inside the outer courtyard, he finds Rufy. She's wrapped head to toe in bandages, sitting on a stone block eating something, approximately 18 years old in apparent age, and immediately demands to know if he has any food that isn't sand-flavored. She introduces herself as an ancient mummy of tremendous power and dignity. She has jam on her bandages. The half-serpent woman appears shortly after, Minute, a high-tier noble servant loyal to the Karas Emperor's corrupted current form. She uses hypnosis to paralyze targets before engaging with a tail strike that operates outside standard combat range. Her opening approach is to make eye contact and begin the hypnosis activation sequence. Rokan doesn't make eye contact. He looks at her left shoulder, registers her movement signature from his peripheral vision, and when the tail strike comes, he steps inside its arc and puts his axe through the engagement before the hypnosis has time to stack. Minute goes down. Rufy watches this with apparent scholarly interest, eating her food. She explains, casually, that she's been waiting for someone to handle Minute for about 3 weeks. She then offers Rokan a subordination contract, a dark binding agreement that would give her significant authority over his character actions. She presents this as a reasonable arrangement. He declines. She considers his declination for a moment, then shrugs and says she'll come with him anyway. The Imperial City sector of the Karas Empire is a fully realized ancient civilization, massive stone architecture, an active citizen population of NPC humans and half-serpent nobles, and a guard system that identifies and restricts outsider access at every major checkpoint. Rokan doesn't have Imperial citizenship, he has a fake mustache, the identity disguise skill, and the confidence of someone who has run this kind of problem before. The disguise runs for 6 hours before the guard rotation resets its recognition flags. He uses the window to map the city's internal layout, locate the underground prison system, and identify the Soul Drain Obelisk network, a series of magical pillars distributed through the city's foundation layer that are, as he discovers through the prison documentation, actively siphoning life energy from the imprisoned civilian population and routing it upward into the Imperial Sanctum. King Scorpion isn't a king anymore in any meaningful sense. He was a legendary hero, genuinely great, genuinely powerful, who lost his physical body over centuries of isolation after a catastrophic defeat. What's left is a giant corrupted eyeball. A massive, ancient, psychically powerful entity that has been slowly converting its own empire's population into fuel for the project of getting a body back. The Soul Drain Network is the infrastructure for this project. The obelisks are the mechanism. The imprisoned citizens are the source material. Rufy goes quiet when she processes what the documentation says. Not afraid, something more complex than that. She's been wandering the outer pyramid zones for years with fragmented memories, a strange connection to this place she couldn't explain. The documentation answers some of what she couldn't remember. The old woman, the kitchen. 12 years ago, a memory that surfaces complete and sudden. A woman who welcomed her into a house, offered her bread and jam, treated her as a person rather than a monster. She didn't know then what she was, she understands now. She's the physical manifestation of King Scorpion's pure conviction, the portion of his original self that refused to become what he became, given form and separated from the corruption. The last good thing he ever generated, walking around eating jam and pretending to be a mummy. If the Emperor completes his restoration, that part of him gets reabsorbed. The woman in the kitchen, the bread, the jam, all of it gets pulled back into a corrupted god that doesn't remember being good. She tells Rokan she's going in with him. He doesn't argue. The infiltration plan is a fake death. Rokan stages a visible confrontation in the outer sanctum. Loud, attention-generating, the kind of combat event that draws the Emperor's awareness and the guard system's response. At the apparent conclusion of the fight, Rufy uses an illusion construct she's been building since they entered the city to project a convincing death event. Rokan's apparent body, convincingly inert, convincingly logged out. The Sanctum's guard response withdraws. The Emperor's attention shifts back to the Soul Drain cycle. The inner sanctuary's access seals reduce from full lockdown to standard maintenance status. Rokan walks in through the maintenance access route. The inner sanctuary is a cathedral-scale chamber built around the Emperor's current form. The giant corrupted eyeball suspended in a web of soul drain conduits, each conduit connecting to an obelisk below. The eye is massive. It radiates the psychic weight of centuries of accumulated corruption. The air in the chamber doesn't feel normal. Rokan walks to the closest conduit, pulls his war axe, and stabs the Emperor. The eye swivels toward him. The fight that follows is unlike anything he's faced. King Scorpion's eyeball form doesn't have conventional weak points. The eye itself is the entire entity, and its attack methodology is psychic rather than physical. It generates pressure waves of corrupted energy that don't register as standard damage, but cause direct stat suppression, reducing Rokan's combat values as they stack. Enough stacks and he simply can't hit hard enough to matter. He brings the stacks down using Destruction Burst's absorption inversion, but the Emperor's output rate exceeds his ability to consistently clear the suppression. The eye also controls the conduit network. It can direct soul drain energy as a weapon, channeling concentrated beams that deal enormous direct damage at targeted points. Rokan is managing 3 separate threat vectors simultaneously: psychic suppression stacks, targeted conduit beams, and the eye's direct physical manifestation attacks. He handles it for longer than anyone watching would think possible. But the math eventually catches him. The Emperor transitions to its ultimate form, a Cyclops. A full physical body, ancient, enormous, armored in reformed soul energy. The restoration is partial, fueled by the soul drain cycle running continuously beneath them. Not complete, but enough. The Cyclops is a different fight entirely. Physical. Devastating. Fast. It takes Rokan's war axe away on the third exchange. Then it takes the backup weapon. Then it throws him through the chamber wall, through the corridor beyond, through another wall, and deposits him in a different room, with approximately half his torso registering as critically damaged. The system interface appears in front of him, a floating notification box, luminous and calm, asking him to confirm logout due to critical health status. He punches it. The box shatters. The fragments dissolve. The logout prompt doesn't reappear. He gets up. Rufy is back in the chamber when he returns. She's standing between the Cyclops and the soul drain conduit network, not fighting, holding. Using every illusion and energy construct she can generate to keep the Emperor's attention divided, buying seconds, costing herself each one. She looks at him when he comes through the wall. She says very simply that she knows what she is now. She knows what happens if they fail. And she's decided that the woman in the kitchen was worth more than what the Emperor wants to recover. The fusion is not a skill. It's not in any ability tree. It's a convergence. Rokan's accumulated physical combat architecture, combined with Rufy's manifestation of the Emperor's original pure conviction, the two of them resolving into something the system registers as a new entity class. 4 arms. Light-based war axe. Not a standard weapon. A construct generated by the fusion's combined energy, approximately the size of a small building. Rokan's combat reflexes and pattern recognition driving the whole structure. Rufy's conviction giving it weight that physical stats alone can't generate. The Cyclops looks at this and swings. The fusion catches the strike with 2 of its 4 arms, absorbs the momentum, steps through, and brings the light war axe down. The Emperor's physical form, the Cyclops, the centuries of corruption, the entire restoration project, vaporizes in the impact. Not defeated, not driven back. The energy that composed it disperses in a fraction of a second, and the soul drain conduit network below them reverses. Every life energy siphoned from the prison population flowing back through the obelisks and returning to the people it was taken from. The territory-wide reversal takes approximately 10 seconds. Every imprisoned citizen in the Karas Empire wakes up. The obelisks crack from the reversed flow and go dark. Rufy dissolves. Not violently, not painfully, as far as Rokan can tell. She disperses into the atmospheric energy of the Imperial sector, the conviction she was made of spreading back into the world that generated it. The jam stain on her bandages is the last thing that registers before she's gone. The system attempts to process the events in the inner sanctum and runs a cascade of achievement notifications that don't fit neatly into existing categories. Rokan is sitting on the floor of the chamber when the Falcon extraction units come through the door. They're corporate. Clean uniforms, professional movement, equipment that doesn't appear in any game system catalog because it isn't game equipment. They move through the sanctum like a team that has done this before. Mary Kim comes in last. She's high-level Falcon, the game's developmental parent company, and her role is not exactly public relations. She tracks interdimensional rift activity. She evaluates candidates. She has been monitoring Rokan's activity logs since approximately the Kato sewer clearance, which generated the first anomalous pattern in her tracking system. A solo player clearing a group-designated event with efficiency metrics that exceeded projected human performance. She tells him the truth about the capsules, not as a revelation, as a briefing. She's not surprised he reacts the way he does. She's seen the reaction before. The 2-headed ogre corpse is from Antarctica. Physical remains, preserved, brought back from an active rift site on the continent's interior. She shows it to him in a subterranean laboratory facility beneath the Imperial Pyramid Complex. A real room with real fluorescent lighting and real refrigeration units, sitting underneath a game location that millions of players think is a piece of fantasy architecture. The corpse is enormous. It has 2 heads. It is unambiguously, verifiably, biologically real. Rokan stares at it for a long time. The confirmation isn't that the game is real. He processed that en route. The confirmation is that the rift activity is expanding. Antarctica is one site. There are others. The creatures coming through aren't contained within the game's server structure anymore. They're beginning to breach into standard physical locations. The Falcon Corporation has been managing this quietly for years. They need people who can operate on both sides of the boundary, people with the combat capability to function in rift environments, and the real-world grounding to not completely lose their frame of reference when the two sides collide. They've identified Rokan as a candidate. A corporate sniper sends a tracking round through the briefing room window, not to kill him, Mary clarifies immediately, to demonstrate that they can, that they've had a targeting solution on him since he entered the building, that the offer she's about to make is genuine and not something he can simply walk away from without consequence. He looks at the hole in the wall, looks at her. She asks if he'd like to know his temporal regression's origin. He tells her he'll take the Vanguard contract. She doesn't answer the regression question. She probably doesn't know. He suspects nobody does. The contract is formal. Signed in the real world, across a conference table in the Falcon facility, with real pens and real paper. Rokan as a designated Vanguard ranker, authorized to operate within Rift zones, allocated resources for ongoing combat development, and granted classified access to information about the Rift expansion timeline. In exchange, reporting, operational coordination, availability when Falcon's monitoring system flags a critical emergence event. He reads every clause before signing. Mary watches him read without comment. She was expecting him to skim. He adds one condition of his own. He operates solo. No assigned unit, no mandatory coordination, no approved operational parameters beyond the emergency protocols. He'll take the contract briefings and the resource allocation. He will not take a handler. She considers this for 30 seconds and agrees. The paperwork is processed. The facility's staff treat him with the particular careful neutrality that people use around individuals who have just demonstrated the capacity to be extremely dangerous. He finds it appropriate. The game world is waiting. The rainy forest on the central continent is dark and dense and completely soaked. Sheets of rain coming down through a canopy that filters it into a continuous gray mist at ground level. The kind of environment that kills visibility at 30 meters and makes footing unpredictable on every moss-covered route. Rokan is standing over a two-headed ogre, not a corpse from a refrigerated Antarctic specimen room, a live one that just stopped being live, pinned to the forest floor by a broadsword through its center mass. He made the transition from axes during the 6 months of active Rift operations that followed the Falcon contract. The broadsword is higher reach, more versatile in the three-dimensional positioning that Rift combat requires, and the bleeding modification transferred cleanly from his war axe to the new weapon during an enhancement session with a Rift-adjacent Gorek equivalent who operates out of a facility outside standard game geography. The ogre's second head is still twitching. He pins it. He straightens up, pulls the hood of his travel cloak back to let the rain hit his face for a moment. His interface shows the broadsword's level progression, 2 notches closer to the enhancement tier he's targeting for the next Rift zone. His achievement log has notifications he hasn't opened yet from the ogre kill, probably a hidden title tied to this specific creature type in this specific zone. He opens the log. 2 new titles. One is a combat mastery certification for two-headed opponents, adding a permanent damage multiplier to strikes against biologically duplicated target structures. Useful. The other is a zone conquest marker, a territorial flag that registers him as the controlling presence in this section of forest, which will affect NPC faction behavior in the area going forward. He accepts both, files them in his build architecture. Somewhere in the global ranking system, his visible level is still not impressive. His actual combat values are something the ranking system's display tier wasn't designed to represent, and somewhere in a Ragnarok Guild meeting on a different continent, Odin is managing an organization he spent years building while remaining genuinely unaware that the man he deleted is back. 3 years of knowledge, flawless hidden achievements, gear that shouldn't exist at his apparent tier, a contract that gives him resources and access, a vendetta that is patient, methodical, and has been building since the moment he woke up in 2021. Rokan rolls his shoulders. The rain comes down. Another two-headed ogre, bigger, faster, the kind the Rift Zone spawns when it detects that the previous one didn't come back, is moving through the trees at his 9 o'clock. He turns toward it. He's not smiling exactly. It's something more specific than a smile, the expression of a man who has been underestimated so many times that the underestimation itself has become a weapon, and who is now operating in an environment where every enemy he finds is exactly the right warm-up for what's eventually coming. The rift is expanding. Ragnarok is organizing. Odin is at the top of a leaderboard that he thinks is the most important one, and Rokan is in a rainy forest getting better.